Welcome to Blender add-on development for beginners. In this first module, we introduce a few basics, like how to work with the built-in Python console and how to use the built-in text block editor. We then quickly move to the next video to create an actual add-on that defines an operator, one that moves the active object 1 unit along the x-axis. That may not sound very exciting, but it does in fact introduce most of the elements that any add-on needs. Then we show how you can define this operator as part of an add-on that can then be installed in any Blender environment. We end this module with a video that shows how to create a menu entry for our operator, and then making the add-on as robust as possible, and explore ways to make the operator configurable. An optional video at the end of this module will discuss the pros and cons of using an editor outside of Blender. In this first video, we start in Blender's Python console so we can experiment a bit. We see how we can use the context to get a reference to the active object and then change its location. We also take a brief look at Blender's documentation. So let's get started. To get a feeling for what we can do with Python in Blender, we are first going to look at the Python console. This will allow us to experiment a bit and will create a basis for building add-ons later. The Python console is just another Blender editor, so let's switch the timeline to the Python console and make it a bit larger. We can make the text more readable by pressing Ctrl+. We see all kinds of interesting things here. For example, that my version of Blender comes with Python 3.11. It also lists the modules that are available by default. The names of those modules give some idea of what we can do. bpi.data, for example, gives access to all collections of different objects that may be present in the blend file, like meshes, curves, lights, etc. And bpi.ops defines all built-in operators. And there is the convenience alias C for the bpi.context module. We will use that one a lot because the context holds all the information about the current state of your blend file. This includes whether we are in edit or object mode, which objects are selected, and a lot more. But here we are interested in the currently active object. So let's see how we can get hold of that. We make sure the cube is selected, and then in the Python console we type C dot and use the tab key to expand the available possibilities. The context has a lot of attributes, so we narrow this down by typing the first few letters and then pressing tab again, until we have the active object attribute. When we press return, we see that the active object attribute indeed points to our cube. Objects have a lot of attributes too. So we press the up arrow to get the previous bit of Python again, and here we are looking for the location attribute. So we type a few characters and press tab to see the completions until we find what we are looking for. The location attribute holds the location of the object in world space, and when we press the return key, it should be no surprise that we get something back with 0 for all coordinates. What we actually get back is a vector, one of Blender's many classes. We can change the location attribute, and a vector object has attributes for all 3 directions. So if we want to move the object 1 unit along the x-axis, we can simply add 1 to its x attribute. When we do this, we can see it has an immediate effect. The cubes move along the x-axis. It moves out of sight even, so let's move it into view again. So we are now actively changing the scene using Python. The context has more information. We can see, for example, what mode we are in, information we often need when developing add-ons. We are now in object mode, and when we switch to edit mode, we can see that the mode attribute reflects that. We can also use Blender's many operators, for example, to add an icosphere. Let's add one with a modest radius. Now you might wonder, where do we get information on what is possible? And here the Blender API documentation is essential. It's available on docs.blender.org/API, and you can find the documentation for all versions here. You probably want to use the current one, and when we follow that link, we find a lot of information, including some general material that is a really good idea to read. On the side, you can see that each of the Python modules has its own entry. For example, we can find out what is available in the context module, or what operators are available. If you have some idea of what you are looking for already, you can of course also use the search functionality. The available documentation is huge, and all this might feel a bit overwhelming at first. So that's why we are going to build a very simple add-on in the next few videos and focus just on what is needed. Links to relevant parts of the API will be provided where relevant, but we focus on getting something done first, because I think it's easier to extend something simple than to start digging into lots of information at the start. Almost all Blender data is accessible to Python, and the context is often the key starting point if you want to change things in a scene. Here we saw that the context provides us with access to the active object and the edit mode, for example. Objects also have a lot of attributes we can manipulate directly, location being just one of them. And we also saw our first use of a built-in operator to add an icosphere. So what's next? Typing something in the console can be useful to try out small snippets, and it's certainly something you will revisit while developing, but most of the time we want to create a functional add-on, and for that we need an editor and some knowledge about what an add-on may look like. And that is in fact the topic of the next video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.